mean, a lot of it is the prophecy. So, well, tonight we're starting on Mark 14 after 5 tries because of the rain and everything. Jesus' betrayal, arrest, and his trial. And I'm going to croak through this. I'm kind of got a little bit of that allergies going on. After 2 days, it was the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. Okay? 2 times or 3 times a year, if you're a Jewish man, you're supposed to go to Jerusalem and I don't want to say pay your respects, but go through the rites of doing the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 2 other times that they have. They're supposed to come down and do that. A lot of them now, of course, don't, but they don't have the sanctuary, the temple there. But they thought, because Jesus was upholding and according to the law, he would be there during this time. So they were starting to plan his demise. This is the week leading up to his death. Okay, this is the last week of Christ that we're starting right here. He entered, actually it started last week, or last chapter, but when he was in there. So after the last chapter says, after 2 days, it was the Passover. So, and Jesus was killed on Friday, which is the night starting the Passover. That's what a lot of people believe. Okay, some people say that there were actually 2 holy days in there. But this time is significant because there was at Passover not only great expectation of the Messiah, but Jerusalem was crowded with these Messiah expecting multitudes. They had heard about his healings and all the things that he had done, raising people from the dead. And it had gotten around. He'd been on the earth, been on his ministry for 3 years now doing this. And a lot of people have heard, and they came about to try to hear from him. And the chief priests didn't have anything on him. So that's why Mark is telling us how they might take him by trickery. They were going to try to trick him into somehow blaspheming, against God or something like that. But they didn't want to do it during the feast because they knew the people would rise up and rile against them if they didn't have a good plan. So it says in John gives us a lot more detail about the last week, okay? John 11 says it seems the religious leaders originally intended to seize Jesus during the feast. And when they saw the popularity of Jesus at the entry, the triumphal entry, and his authority on the Temple Mount, they changed their minds to do it after the feast. Well, then their plan changed when Judas made his arrangement with them. Okay, Brother Epperson.
And being in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil and a sprinkler, then broke the flask and poured it on his head.
Okay. Now Bethany is just a short way, about a mile or so, just outside of Bethany. Outside of Jerusalem. It's up on the Mount of Olives, and then you go on top of the Mount of Olives and kind of go down the valley. It's right over there somewhere. They have Bethany and Bethphage, what they called. And this is here. It says John's account of this incident. Again, John tells us that the lady was Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Martha. And that's the story that we saw on The Chosen when we saw it. So she gave this spikenard, this very fragrant, very expensive ointment to on his head, and she used all of it. Okay? Now, alabaster, which it tells us is an alabaster flask, that holds it a lot better. First of all, it's very expensive, and it could have a stopper in it. In this particular case, it told us that she broke the flask, meaning that you're not going to be able to use it again, and then poured all that out. Over on the next page, page 3, Pliny the Elder, which is a first century person, said the best ointment is preserved in alabaster. The value of the perfume and its identification as nard suggests that it was a family heirloom passed down one from another generation, from mother to daughter. And it was kind of like it says it was a bottle with a thin neck at the top and then a larger at the bottom. So I guess that if you wanted to say in our thinking about it, it's perfume, not cologne. I guess that's the way I look at it. It's not the cheap stuff. It's a really expensive, whatever it's a Chanel 5 or whatever it is now. Whatever is $100 or whatever it is, a lot. This was even a lot more expensive than that. It was an oil that was very fragrant. So it says, when a guest arrived for a meal, it was customary to anoint the guest's head with a dab of oil. Here the woman poured out more than the customary ingredient. She poured out the whole thing on his head. There's a lot more you can read about it there. This is a long chapter, so we're not going to go through each one of these. You can read them when you get back home. Next page, page 4. Iris, can you read that?
But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply, but Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me, for you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish you may do them good, but me you do not have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her.
Okay. And it says here, they were indignant. Another scripture says, or another version says, some were indignant. Well, you go back to John again, and it tells us it was mainly Judas. And then John gives a little, his commentary. This he said not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it.
Yeah, less money for you.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of people, and I don't know exactly, we'll talk about it a little later when we read about Judas after the crucifixion, but a lot of people place a lot of emphasis that kind of Judas was misplaced, and he probably was. I mean, he was not one of them, but Jesus knew this ahead of time. Okay, he knew somebody was going to betray him, and we'll read about it here in a little bit.
It wasn't always easy to love it either.
Well, there's a lot of people that kind of, it's like you get more than a few people together and you're going to find a bad apple in one of them. I had one guy one time tell me, who was talking about families, and this one guy said, I was one of 10 kids, or maybe 12 or 13, whatever. There's a lot of kids. And he goes, wow, with that, one of them had to be a prison, a maniac or something like that, prisoner. He said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, one was. So it's just like playing the odds almost. You're going to have some people that no matter what you do, we see this today. You try to get something together and say, get everybody to agree upon it, and somebody will say, I don't like that. And they can't really give you a reason, except maybe it's just they don't want to join in with everybody else. But here it did say that they criticized her sharply. Well, Mary was one that was a doer. Okay, well, remember Martha, she went out and did everything. She was out going about making the food and all that. But Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus when that first happened. Well, here, Mary didn't announce herself. She just came in and did what they did. What kind of interrupted their meal that they were having. So the 300 denarii says that's more than a week, more than a year's wages for a laborer. So just think about it. Whatever you've ever made in a year, that's what Mary spent, or what that oil was worth. And a lot of people can say that. Today we see that. Why doesn't the church do more for the poor? Well, if the poor would help themselves, and then sometimes the church. Some expect that. That's right. And it's like that today. Yeah. We have some people that get in that mindset, well, it's mine. Give it to me. Well,
I'm with her every week, and so you can, after some years, you can tell which ones expect it and ones that really want to get out of their situation and improve themselves.
Sure.
Well, they was talking today about Medicare.
Right.
I mean Medicaid.
Yeah.
Out of $10, almost $9 is given to people that aren't sick.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And only $1 and something of it are given to people that really, in other words, people get on it, they have babies, they just keep on it and on it and on it. And they're able to work and stuff, but they don't have to.
Yeah.
And then when you start talking about cutting that out, some people think they're going to cut back Medicare.
Right.
Well,
But
that's draining Medicare, because that money comes from
that
Medicare.
fund. Right.
And some people, and I see it all the time too, they have children so they don't have to work. Because they don't have to go to work till the kids are school age. They'll have another one just, on purpose.
Oh yeah. They work the system.
Oh, they do.
That's what
We see it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, I had last Sunday night I was at the shelter downtown. We have Cemetery has services downtown on Sunday nights because they can't come to us, we go to them.
Right.
Let me tell you, you get some really strange situations.
Well.
You gotta get really strange on Sunday night.
Jesus kind of here in part of his going back to them, talking to them, said she's come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Not too many of the disciples caught that now, and the chosen, they kind of come back with it. Now, what'd you say about burial? What are you talking about? And it's kind of like we've said before, that he said time and time and time again, he was going to die. He wasn't going to be here that long. And now he's just putting it into perspective, telling them the same thing he told them. They're just not understanding it. So, Bertha, on the bottom of page 6.
Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priest to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. So he sought how he might conveniently betray him. Judas Iscariot is one of the 12.
Right. So we see that here, he was probably one of them that was, like I said, John was the one who told us that he was one of the ones that were vehement with her. And Jesus spoke back with him. He would always got before you. You'll always, and people don't understand that, but there will be poor. There'll be orphans and widows, and that's what the church set out to do in the very beginning, was to help the widows and the orphans, those that could not work for themselves. This was back then, a long time ago. Well, now, same thing. That's who they need to take care of, the children and the orphans and the widows. So, and he said, you're always going to have those. There's always situations that happens that you're going to have that.
We run into situations, and we run into situations where they expect you to hand out to them whether they make any efforts to help themselves or not.
Right.
And we run into that a lot. And sometimes our expectations is way too many or too high.
Right.
And then they get upset because, well, you're supposed to be here to help us. All right on now.
Yeah. Well, they want help, but they don't want to help themselves.
No,
so
that's true. They want handouts, but
yeah.
sometimes they want a whole lot that can't be done.
Right.
And we run into that too.
Well, I mean, some of the
Because they
churches.
ask way unreasonable situations. They
Right.
ask for something unreasonable.
Some of the big churches have facilities and things that are available, and I know when I was going to the
Well, that's what they expect.
lunches
Because
downtown,
we're such a large organization.
they
expect
had that,
we're
right.
supposed to have everything under the sun they ever think they ever
But
wanted.
they got to understand that they got to work with what they're given. And
Exactly.
sometimes they don't get it.
It's not like
so.
there's not a million other people either.
No.
That's a biggie thing.
Right. So when they had this, one of his disciples, one of his 12, come to the Pharisees and wanted to make a deal with them, they were glad. It says they wanted to destroy Jesus for a long time. So early Mark, it tells us Mark 3. So now they had an ally. So they're going to have to. They promised him some money. 12 through 16 at the bottom of 7. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where do you want us to go and prepare that you may eat the Passover? And he sent out 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the city. A man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. So his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them. And they prepared the Passover. So this is the day. Their Passover starts in the evening when the sun goes down. Okay? So it's during the day that day that they're getting ready to do that. One of the things that it tells us that usually a man would carry the water in those wineskins. It's not wineskin, but the skins. But they said women would carry them on their shoulders or on their head in those pots. Well, they said it's very unusual to see a man carrying a pot like this. So that made it easier. You'd think, well, with that many people that's here in Jerusalem at this time, how in the world am I going to figure this out? And it's actually, it would be going into Jerusalem. There's where they found them. I don't say here. I don't think that's what it was. But it says they went to prepare the Passover meal. They're talking about, like I said, some of them things it was different days. Well, I've even heard it said that there were 2 Passovers or 2 Sabbaths that week, because the Passover doesn't necessarily have to fall on the Sabbath. It can, like any other day of the week. Brother Epson, 17 through 21.
In the evening he came with the 12. Now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, surely I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me. And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one by one, is it I? Then another said, is it who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes, just as is written of him. But woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for him that the man, if he had never been born.
Now, this room that they went to, what is that room? It's the upper room. Okay, this is the same room that they'll go back to, the disciples will, after Jesus is gone and they go back. I've even heard it say that, and read some places, that this may have been it talks about it in Acts a little later, an upper room. It may not have been the same upper room, but that's where John Mary lived. And this was the mother of John Mark. Okay? So this is, it kind of makes a little sense when you start putting all these things together. And it talks about when they do the Passover, what do they usually do? They have a meal. What does a meal consist of? They have the unleavened bread. They have the herbs, the garlic, the onions, things like that. There was bitter herbs that they had. And they had the Passover lamb. In this meeting, he may have had it, but they didn't ever say it. Jesus never said anything about eating any of the lamb that they had. So, a lot of people are assuming he didn't have lamb there because what? He became the sacrificial lamb. And that's what he's telling them when he goes about, eat this bread. It's my body. Drink this blood. This is my blood. So he is becoming that sacrificial lamb. They don't realize that, and they won't realize that until later. And we'll talk about it. It gets into a little bit more here in the next one. But he talks about them eating. One of them was going to betray them. And it's whoever. Now, all of them had the dishes, and all of them, so they were all dipping the bread in the different stuff and eating it. So they really didn't know who it was until even when Judas left. When Judas left, everybody in one place just says he thought they went to go out and get him something. But he told him in another one of the, maybe it's in the latter part of this one. I'll just wait on that. But it says, woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Judas is rightly regarded as one of the most notorious sinners of all times. Even though his actions fulfilled prophecy, his own wicked motive condemned him. Judas will never be able to justify himself before God on the day of judgment, claiming I was fulfilling prophecy. It says, in the warning of Jesus, we see a profound love for Judas. He was his last fleeting opportunity to turn back from his evil plot. A remarkable thing to remember is that Jesus loved both Mary and Judas. We almost want to think he loved Mary and hated Judas, but that wasn't the case. If we miss his love towards Judas, rejected love, to be sure, but if we miss that love, we miss the whole story. That's what he told them, and then he said he's kept every one of them except the one, son of perdition.
Judas must have, he knew that Jesus loved him and knew that Jesus did forgive him, but Judas couldn't forgive himself.
Well, that happens a little later, yeah. Okay, Iris, 22 through 25.
And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them and said, take, eat, this is my body. Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank it. And he said to them, this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly, I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God.
Okay. And we see that later on. We'll see that as we go into Acts and the later portion. portion of it that Jesus said, he's hungry after he's came back from his resurrection. So he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it, and it says everything eaten at the Passover meal had a symbolic meaning. That's what I was saying. And Sister Bertha said there's a salt water was remembered by the tears that they shed. The main course of the meal was the lamb freshly sacrificed for that particular household. Didn't symbolize anything connected to the agonies of Egypt. It was the sin-bearing sacrifice that allowed the judgment of God to pass over the household that believed. That was the lamb died because there had to be a sacrifice at that time. The lamb died for the firstborn, and they slew it and took that blood and put it on the lintels, the doorposts, so they could see it, so the angel would pass over. So that's the reason there had to be a sacrifice. That's what it's showing. And then it goes about into the different meanings of the substantiation and transubstantiation. And I'm not real high on any of that, so we'll go on over to the next one. It says, "This is my blood, which is shed for many, beyond all the controversy about what the elements of the supper really are and what they mean. The announcement that Jesus brings a new covenant. That's the thing that stands out. This is a new covenant. And then he tells them he won't drink of it again until the kingdom of God, until he's in that." Okay, Bertha, on top of page 12.
And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you that today, even this night, before the rooster crows, twice you will deny me, and 3 times." But he spoke more fervently, "If I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said likewise.
Okay. Here's a new thing that we don't think of a lot. They sang a hymn. Okay. We saw that in The Chosen. They all got together and was singing and having that. Well, here we see that Jesus, they all sung a hymn, and the hymn that they probably sung was one of the Psalms, Psalms 116 to 118, that they said was a lot of times is what they had, what they sang at that particular time. So it said, then they went, he's telling them that all of them are going to turn away from him. And Peter, of course, steps up and says, "No, I won't. I'll never deny you," type thing. And he said, "Well, before the rooster crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. And there's no way, Peter could believe that in his own mind. But he understood afterwards, Jesus said, that Peter would grow from this happening to him. So it says, "After I had been raised," and this shows that Jesus was already looking to the beyond the cross. He had his eyes fixed on the joy set before him, because he was getting ready to go through the most terrible temptation that he could, the last agony of the last few hours. So despite Peter's bold proclamation that he would never be made to stumble, he would fail in what he thought was his strong area, courage and boldness. Through his solemn warning, Jesus gave Peter an opportunity to take and heed and consider his own weakness. Down at the bottom of 14 it says, "Then they came to a place which was named Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. He went a little further and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Okay, when they're eating the Passover meal, typically they tell the story of Moses and leading out of Egypt as they go through this, and they recite that story again. So, as I said, it starts in the evening time when the sun goes down. So by the time they're finished dinner, it's quite dark. It's, who knows, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, maybe midnight. Then they go out to the garden. Okay? So then they're going to the garden. Well, they're up in Jerusalem, so they have to go about that mile and go up into Gethsemane, which is in the bottom part of where the Mount of Olives are. That's where the Gethsemane is. Said it was just east of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, across the ravine of the brook Kidron, and on the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. It was surrounded by these ancient olive trees. And some of those olive trees are still there, and they said they're probably, one of them they show, olive trees are weird as far as the way they grow, because part of it will die, and the rest of it will keep growing. So they had this huge, they had this huge tree, and it had grown up, and the middle of it kind of died off, and this part over here had grown, and they had a pole holding that part of that, because they said one of those trees was probably close to 2,000 years old.
Oh, wow.
So it may have been one of those trees that died. She's died. It produces. Oh, it keeps producing. I mean, whatever dies off, it'll die off, but it grows out here and it'll keep going. And they don't cut olive wood. Olive wood falls. Now they may cut it dead limbs. I'm not sure, but what he told me, they go out and they make all these beautiful sculptures and things out of that olive wood. We visited one of the shops, but they can't go cut trees down, anything like that. They have to go collect the wood that has already fell down. So I'm not sure how all that works, but that's what he said. So,
wow.
Yeah. But a lot of those trees, you could tell, the newer ones, of course, they're not that big around, but those old ones, they were huge. And one of them had a great big fence around it so nobody could get to it. That was right there where they think the garden.
You would think they could not actually give you a couple of minutes.
So he is saying here, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. He was praying to his Father. He didn't want to go through this. We see this here. His human body, his human nature did not want to go through this. But the last part, nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. He wanted God's will to be done. And says, who in the days of his flesh, in Hebrews 5:7-8, says, he who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him, who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Okay. So that's what Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, is telling us. And he cried out, Abba, which in Hebrew is basically Dad, Papa, Father. He's calling him by his name that you call, your father. Mine was always Dad or Daddy. Call him that. In response to Jesus' deeply moved prayers, the Father did not take the cup from Jesus. Instead, he strengthened Jesus to be able to take and drink the cup. In the Old Testament, many times it's a cup. It's a powerful picture of the wrath and the judgment of God. They have some scripture here in Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah. We even read in Revelation, the cup of wrath will be poured out upon the nations in the end times. So, Jesus came to a point of decision in Gethsemane. It wasn't that he had not decided nor consented before, but now he came upon a unique point of decision. He drank the cup of Calvary, but he decided once and for all to drink it in Gethsemane. The struggle of the cross was won at the Garden of Gethsemane. And that's why he prayed. He prayed 3 times. And I hear this sometimes today. It says, not what I will, but what you will. It says some people criticize this kind of prayer in the mouth of a Christian, saying it is a prayer that lacks faith. But to pray not what I will, but what you will is a prayer of great faith and trust in God. If such a prayer insults God, then Jesus insulted his Father at the crucial moment in the Garden of Gethsemane. So I don't think that, you can pray and ask and ask and ask. That's what he tells us. Ask. Keep on asking. Seek. Keep on seeking. Brother Everson, 37 to 40.
Then he came and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not? Am I reading?
Yeah, you're right.
Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, the flesh is weak. Again, he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again. For their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. Then he came the 3rd time and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand.
Okay. So he prayed 3 times, it says. Here, when he came back the first time and found them sleeping and asked them about it, then it said he turned around and went to go pray again, and he prayed the same words. The same words that he prayed before. Again, that's telling us he was still fighting with it. I mean, he was still, wanted to, he chose that time. Like you said, he chose his decision in Gethsemane, but he still wanted to make sure again and go back, and he went back and back.
I think it truly showed that he was the Son of God, and he was the Son of Man.
Right. And we don't know how many of them were with him, maybe all the 12, but we just know that those, it says in the first part, Peter, James, and John was with him. The others may have been somewhere else, still back in the room that they played, but these 3 were with them, and they couldn't stay awake with him. So, but he singled out Simon. And what did he say? Simon. He mentioned it. It's not necessary to see Jesus as irritated at his disciples. He said it is in love and in compassion and understanding. Peter must have been startled to hear Jesus call him Simon, because that was his name before Jesus changed his name to Peter. But he knew that he wasn't ready, because Peter was ready to resist any attack except the attack of the sandman. So Jesus found victory at the cross by succeeding in the struggle in Gethsemane. Peter, just like us, failed in later temptation because he failed to watch and pray what Jesus told him to do. Spiritual battle is often won or lost before the crisis even comes. Then he told them the 3rd time, are you still ready to rest? And he said, rest on. In one of the places he said, rest on. And then he told them that the guy's coming, it's enough. The guy's coming, the betrayer is coming, getting ready to betray me. Okay, Iris, down at the bottom of 18.
And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now his betrayer had given them a He went up to him and said to him, Rabbi, Rabbi, and kissed him. Then they laid their hands on him and took him, and one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus answered and said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then they all forsook him and fled. Now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body. And the young men laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked.
Okay. It says apparently Jesus was normal enough in appearance that it was necessary for Judas to identify him. You got to remember, it was dark. They probably had torches. They didn't have flashlights or anything. And somehow Judas had told them, we see later on, that he's going to identify him with a kiss. And then he called him Rabbi too. John 18 and 10 tells that who the swordsman was. It was Peter. And another, I can't remember which, if it was Luke, tells us that Malchus was the name of the rabbi, the priest's servant, high priest's servant. So they did have some swords with them. If you go back and read some of the other scriptures, he tells them, and they said, well, we got 2 swords here, and he said that'll be enough. But Peter, kind of be like me with wielding a sword, he's going for the guy's head and he hits his ear. He get close to his head, he hits his ear. And so in another scripture, of course, tells us that Jesus, not here, but Jesus went ahead and healed that servant's ear. He put it back on. And if he hadn't have done that, Peter probably would have been going with him to get crucified or to get at least arrested, because he attacked the high priest's servant. And it also tells us that they all fled. It says all of them fled. They all forsook him and fled. Now, some of them stayed closer to him, we'll read a little later on, than others. Peter was one of those that at least followed him into where he could see what was going on. And then it tells us another, and since this is Mark, the writer, Mark, that's writing this down, but he doesn't say it was himself, but a lot of people believe it was himself, a young man. He followed them. So that goes back to where I said that they were in the upper room, that may have been Mark's home, Mary, his mother's home. And when he saw them going out, he may have followed them over to the Garden of Gethsemane to see what was going on. And said this is Mark's way of saying, I was there, I saw this. This is how he said. Many people suppose that the upper room where Jesus held the Last Supper just a few hours earlier, well, that's what I just said. Said when Judas and the group started out for Gethsemane, we can imagine that young Mark hurried, dressed in a simple linen cloth, and set out to meet Judas and his gang to Gethsemane so that he could warn Jesus. He thought he might be doing him a favor. And then it says, the modest spirit of Mark seemed to say, friend Peter, while the Holy Ghost moves me to tell thy fault, and let it stand on record, he also constrains me to write down my own as sort of a preface to it, for I too, in my mad, harebrained folly, would have run unclothed, as I was upon the guard, to rescue my Lord and Master. Yet at the first sight of the rough legionnaires, at the first gleam of their swords, away I fled, timid, faint-hearted, and afraid that I should be too roughly handled. That's from Charles Spurgeon. And I can see that. I mean, I can see, young young man or older boy or whatever see those big legionnaires with all their armor he's taken off. Now, to get a real timeline, you need to read all the scriptures, all four gospels, okay? Because you won't get, in one of the gospels, you won't get the whole timeline. It says Mark did not record the preliminary trial, which was before Annas. That's recorded back in John 18. And they met at night. This was the time they took him from there to Ananias, which was Caiaphas' father-in-law, I believe. And he was the head high priest at the time, kind of the co-high priest with them. Nor did they record the second trial before the Sanhedrin. The official daylight trial was recorded in Luke 22. If you go back and read through that, the Sanhedrin broke so many rules of their own. There wasn't supposed to be a trial at night. There wasn't supposed to be all these different things. It says there are similarities between the trials because the same people were involved. There were actually 3 phases of Jesus' trial before the Jewish authority and 3 phases of his trial before Roman authorities. And they should not be confused. So you see 3 different times he goes through. So this is a long night. It took a long time. It said upon his arrest, Jesus was first taken to Ananias, then to an illegal night court of the Sanhedrin, which Mark will describe next, then to an official daylight trial of the Sanhedrin, then to Pilate, who sent Jesus to Herod, who sent Jesus back to Pilate, where he then went to the cross. That's kind of the back and forth of the whole, if you read all the scriptures. Okay, the next scripture, which is Bertha?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests, and the elder and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the servants, and warmed himself at the fire. Now the chief priest and all the council warmed himself at the fire. Now the chief and priest and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build it another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree.
Okay. Everything they had, they didn't get any witnesses to agree upon anything. Okay. No matter what they said. And the things they said wasn't actually true. What he said is these temples will be torn down, and in 3 days he wasn't talking about that physical temple. He's talking about his temple, his body. So that's what he's saying there. He says the accusation was utterly serious, for throughout the Greco-Roman world, the destruction or desecration of places of worship was regarded as a capital offense. But, says we remember Tennyson's words, a lie that is all a lie may be met and fought outright, but a lie that is partly the truth is harder matter to fight. What did Satan tempt Eve with? A part of what God said. He didn't say you'd really die, did he? Says it's harder to agree on a consistent lie than to tell the simple truth. That's why you always see in all these stories, we got to get our story straight, because they start asking them questions and they don't come up with the same story. Middle of 22. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of questions, except that he said that words that I am is very similar words to what God said to Moses, I am that I am. Said Jesus, when asked under a formal oath to incriminate himself, essentially said, you now stand in judgment of me, but I will be the ultimate judge. These words would have given any wise judge pause, but it didn't even slow down his accusers. Said in a real sense, it wasn't Jesus on trial at all. It was more accurate to say those religious leaders were on trial. They seemed to win, but they really lost. In fact, we all are on trial before Jesus and will be held to account for what we do with him. Brother Everson, 63 to 65.
Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, what further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. Then some began to spit on him, and to blindfold him, and to beat him, and to say to him, prophesy. And the officers struck him with the palm of their hands.
Now, the Pharisees, or the Sanhedrin, they couldn't kill him. The only time they could hurt somebody or kill them is if there was blasphemy in the temple, on the high temple grounds. They wasn't there. They was in Caiaphas's area in this trial that was going on, I guess. So if it was in the right place, they could have killed him then, but they didn't want that on their conscience. They wanted to take it to the Romans and have the Romans do the dirty work, and that's what they did. So they spit on him, and they began to already, he was in a weakened state. We don't know how long he had stayed awake already, but we know the last time he drank anything was the wine back in the supper, and then later on he doesn't drink anything, and that's part of why he is so weird here later on. I'll read the last one because it's a long one. It's on page 25. Now as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you are saying. And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again and began to say to those who stood by, this is one of them. But he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it. Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. A second time the rooster crowed. It's getting near dawn, okay? Then the Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he went out and wept. So he saw himself right there, what Jesus saw more than what he could see in himself. That he was not able to even stand under the questioning of a girl, of a woman. And we see a little later on, John was also there because he entered actually into, he had in another scripture, it says that he was known and he got into he was actually not part of it, but he could see what was going on also, John was, because he had some friends in high places. Okay? But even Peter says, thinking this will distance himself from this association, Peter began to curse and to swear. When we hear that kind of language, we assume the person is not a follower of Jesus Christ. And that's true. I remember the one story, I don't remember what it was. I can't remember the first part of it, but a policeman pulled the lady over, and she was just cussing him up, story one down the other. And he said, well, I had to call in your car because I knew, a Christian. It was like a pastor like, or the Christian wouldn't have said some of the stuff that you said. So, it says it wasn't the crowing of the rooster that convicted Peter, it was the remembering of Christ's words. That's what put him to crying or to weeping, because he knew the end that Peter, Christ knew him better himself than Peter knew him. So, well, I appreciate it. We had to kind of hurry through that, because it's a long lesson. We could have probably broken it up into two, but I went ahead and get through all of it because we got a lot of TV watching here pretty soon with the House of David, and then